My wife had a college roommate who came with us on vacation one year with her family, and we took lots of pictures. She took a lot of pictures as we were on this vacation. We had a wonderful time together, and in sort of a way to remember that vacation, she gathered a bunch of her pictures together, put them into collage, and put them in a picture frame, and sent it to us as a gift and a thanksgiving for the time we had together. It had pictures of everybody that was there, but she found out to her dismay that was everybody but me. She had simply not noticed that she hadn't included any pictures of me. She was very apologetic. As someone who has no aesthetic sense at all, I didn't really care. I enjoyed the vacation, but she felt terrible. Well, I'm going to describe a collage today. Pictures of things that the Lord is doing in the diocese. And if by chance your picture is not in it, your ministry is not mentioned, please know that it is completely unintentional. So please forgive me at the front end. Our diocesan mission statement is to encourage missional initiatives and planting of congregations, to strengthen existing parishes and ministries, and to identify, train, and deploy missional leaders. We have summarized that to be plant churches, strengthen congregations, and raise up leaders. And so I want to report in those categories if I could today. First of all, plant churches. You've just heard that we're going to be giving more funding to church planting curacies, finding leaders who can plant a congregation, have them intern in an existing congregation with the goal to plant, with the diocese helping with about a third of their support over the years. That's the goal. We've already started. The Church of the Apostles has taken on John Bacon. We've got other church planters potential in the works. We're doing an assessment process for church planters in partnership with other dioceses and ministries. What we've learned over the years, we meaning Anglican Church in North America and other churches in America, have learned that assessing the leaders at the front end and then providing support all the way through is much more likely to lead to a successful church plant. And so we have those systems in place, putting them in place more and more. I'm very excited about the church planting curacies. But I need to tell you that it's not to say that we wouldn't welcome other types of curacies as well. However, in terms of our ordination process, we're beginning to move to a place that we're going to assess people who are considering ordination, at least to the priesthood. We're going to ask them to go through a church planting assessment. That doesn't mean that they're going to end up as church planters. But given what I said last night, canoeing the mountains, looking at the culture as it's going, the leaders we need to raise up have to have a heart for church planting, and they have to have some sense that even within existing congregations, they're going to be doing the kinds of things that church planters have to do if we're going to reach the gospel, reach the culture with the gospel. That's the bottom line. So whether they test high or low in some of the requisite gifts for church planters, we need to have some kind of assessment that says this person would fit into this part of the puzzle as we move forward in ministry together. So just an awareness there that church planting is going to continue to be part of our DNA. Now, we are not having the workshop on why plant churches. Because of Dan Alger not being with us. But very soon, or perhaps already, there is a video that Taylor Bodo, our canon for church planting, has done. It's just a brief 8 or 9 minute video on why plant churches, and I encourage all of you as representatives of your congregations to take that time once it's out and just watch it. It will help you understand why it matters so much. It's nothing to do with existing congregations. It's not setting up competitors. That's not what we're about. But I will say this, the history has shown that congregations that are involved in planting churches are strengthened themselves over and over and over again. So it's actually to the benefit of existing congregations to plant churches. Having said that, we're not using the model that was common for many years in the church of taking half the congregation or a third of the congregation or a quarter of the congregation and sending them off. Now that model had some real advantages. There's a huge church in Jacksonville that took several hundred people and planted another church. It gets momentum going. So I'm not against that model. It's simply not the model we're using. We, first of all, don't have the resources to do it that way, and there's some downsides to doing that way, because we want church plants that figure out what would it take to reach this particular segment of the population in this particular location. And if you just migrate another group of people over to that new location, you also have to wrestle with the fact that they want to do it the way they've been doing it before. So we are committed to church planting, not just for the sake of the church plants, not just for the sake of reaching people with the gospel, but also for the sake of strengthening our existing congregations. So let me move on to strengthening congregations. Almost all of our congregations have been through the assessment process, and I want to thank all of you for going through it. And we're building on that information. We talked about it at the clergy conference, and it is the root for several of the workshops that we are doing today. Two of the greatest weaknesses we found out for our diocese was, how do you have a missional focus? How do we get the people in the pews out into the culture with the gospel? And also, how can we support missionary efforts beyond ourselves? The second one is that we don't, in general, have clear paths for leadership development. We haven't really thought through, how do we raise up leaders within our own congregation, and then beyond that, how do we raise up leaders for the larger ministry we share together. It's haphazard. Some congregations are doing a good job of it, but most of us, our score is low in that area. Our goal is to find ways to coach current leaders, clergy and leaders, so that they can be refocused on how to train up our children and members to be missionaries, as I said last night. And there are no quick fixes here, but we can set course in that direction. There are many positive signs around the diocese. Adult baptisms of new believers, alpha programs, etc., etc., etc. Lots of good things that are going on. I believe we could do a lot more, but it's a question of learning and training and rethinking. One of the most painful things that I had to wrestle with when I was on a sabbatical is that if you need to add something new into your life, you have to let go of something that's already there. On the theory that the Lord has only given us 24 hours a day, and He really wants us to be sleeping for a significant period of time in order to stay healthy. So He's really given us less than that. So in order for us to do some of the things we're going to need to do, we're going to have to let go of some of the things we're doing. Now, I don't mean parish programs necessarily. I think it's more a question of individuals and congregations. If you're going to be used by God to mentor a new believer, Let's say you're going to give them an hour or two a week, an hour with them, and maybe, I can tell you from experience, you'll be another hour on the phone in the course of that week, because so many things will come up and so many problems will happen. If you're going to do that, you're going to have to let go of 2 hours or something. That's just the way it works. If we're going to be missionaries, there are things we're doing in our normal day-to-day life. We have to say, that's great, but we still have to let it go. I don't know what that will be for you. I'm still wrestling with what it means for me. Strengthening congregations begins with the leaders refocusing their personal priorities. Not just the clergy, but especially the lay leadership. I'm very grateful for Mark Eldridge and his role, both in our diocese and now for his new role as the Director of Church Revitalization and Coaching for the American Anglican Council as they work to strengthen congregations around the ACNA. So Mark is still working with us. He's stepped down as the rector of Christ Church in Jacksonville to work with AAC. We get to, in some sense, be the local guinea pigs for the things that he's learning and training. And we already had that experience with our clergy for the last couple of days. It's been very encouraging. I want to welcome Phil Ashey, a workshop leader, president of the AAC, as our guest as well. And I encourage many of you to head to their workshops. Along the line of strengthening congregations continues to be the issue of succession. In terms of the succession plans that we've been pushing for about a year now, I think we're a little bit more than half completed. It's not that hard. We have a template. We simply are asking your vestry to go through that template and refine it, not just pass it, but refine it, tweak it for your situation. But we really need to have those done. Mark Eldridge admitted to me and to others that even though he was on diocesan staff, he was running behind schedule on getting his succession plan done within his congregation. He finally presented it 1 month, or they worked on it together, but it was presented to vestry 1 month, and they passed it. And the next month, to his surprise as well as theirs, he was offered a new job. And that succession plan that had looked theoretical when they were working on it, all of a sudden became very practical and real. And the result, because they knew how to do it, they had already talked about it, the plan was in place, was a smooth transition and the call of a new rector, Matt Rush. The one thing I can tell you about your clergy is that they are temporary. And if you have a plan that's been agreed upon ahead of time, before it looks like they're going to be leaving you, so it's done peacefully without the pressure of that, you'll do a better plan and it will lead to a much better transition. Some of you are well aware that the same thing happened with Jim Hobby. He put a plan together for Trinity Thomasville, and the next thing he knew, he was called to be the Bishop of Pittsburgh. But that plan meant that we had a smooth transition and were able to welcome David Troutman. Speaking of successions, I want to thank David Bryan, who you just heard from before, who is the bishop over Holy Trinity and brought them into the diocese, for his hard work working with their team in succession at Holy Trinity and calling Matt Kirk, who will be coming soon. David has done an enormous amount of very careful pastoral work in that situation. So when it comes to strengthening congregations, Succession actually matters, and I ask you not to keep putting it off in your vestry meetings if you haven't dealt with it yet. Now, one of the ways to strengthen congregations is to do mission together. Many of you have been involved in hurricane relief as part of your mission. And on the theory that we may have more hurricanes in our future, I have asked Rick Smith of All Souls, formerly of the Church Army, to coordinate our efforts within the diocese. And Rick and Anna, where are you? Are you in here somewhere? Yes, please stand, both. Let's give them a hand. I'll tell you more what they did in a minute. I'm just going to give you the headlines of the report of the number of people reached and the number of groups involved in particularly Irma relief. In the last several weeks, couple months, 2,500 people were reached for Christ as a result of meeting needs in storm-afflicted communities. They had volunteers coming from 8 states, as well as Nova Scotia and Canada. 520 care bags were distributed with food and relief items in Duval and St. Johns counties. There were 18 supporting Anglican churches and ministries, 5 supporting dioceses, Gulf Atlantic Diocese, the Diocese of the South, the Diocese of South Carolina, the Anglican Network in Canada, and the Catholic Diocese of Florida. 11 supporting churches and ministries, non-Anglican. 3 Christian radio stations were involved, 160 volunteers, and a network of 10,000 people praying for this project across the country. 2 other ministries who were very involved. I mentioned Church Army was one of them as part of the prayer teams there and active using their prayer network, and also CMJ USA was involved. The Rick is also working for outreach with CMJ, the church's ministry to Jewish people, or Christian ministry to Jewish people in USA. He and Anna are also working with some Jewish outreach through that ministry, and working with All Souls and others there. Incidentally, this is not a job for him. This is all volunteer work. 8 Christian businesses donating time and services. This is just the beginning. They've got more plans ahead to go further south and work in the areas afflicted down there. They have a display over here. You can catch them. If we can't, in this area, figure out how to minister to people in the midst of storms, we are missing a calling. If we're going to be missional, that's one of the missions the Lord has laid at our doorstep. But it strengthens the congregations that are part of it. Remember, I said we mature as missionaries as we do mission. That's just the way it works. You know, when you go to somebody who's just lost their home, you look at your home and your possessions differently. It changes your view and your understanding of stewardship. Now, along the lines of mission, I've already introduced to you Bishop Danny and Brian Keurig from Gospel for Asia. They too will have a display over here. Gospel for Asia tied to Believers Eastern Church. One of the things that's important to note is that many Christian aid organizations, as well as just other non-governmental organizations, NGOs in India, have been kicked out in the last 2 years, including Compassion International and the Bill Gates Foundation. It's not all Christian groups. Anything Western is getting pushed away right now. But because Gospel for Asia is the partner or support ministry for Believers Eastern Church, they can still operate. They're supporting, at this point, about 75,000 children, and they need more sponsors. One of the things that they've done in India and elsewhere is to go in with a Bridges of Hope program to start ministering to the kids in the area. They begin to share the gospel as they meet some of the needs of those kids educationally and otherwise. The parents then get involved, and then in the midst of that, people come to faith and churches are planted. It's quite a vision. Several of you have had catalogs delivered to your congregations, Christmas catalogs. This is the most fun shopping you will ever do. Ways in which to support children and their families and the ministry there. They will send church planters out, but they do need resources and support, and they have an incredible track record. What many of us spend on one dinner out could support 2 children a month. Pray about how you could be a part of that. We are in partnership in ACNA with Believers Eastern Church and another sort of partner church there called Good Shepherd. God is doing an amazing thing. We have so much to learn from them. But we need to hear the cry of a world without Christ and respond every way we can. So strengthening our congregations through mission. Now let me talk about raising up leaders. We have an excellent high school retreat called Dynamos, and one of the things that takes place in Dynamos, in addition to the gospel and basic discipleship being shared with the students who come, is that we're training other students as they go through the program to become leaders. It's been very effective. The excitement level, the passion level, the commitment level of the students and the volunteers who work with them is extraordinary. If we can teach a kid that they can be a Christian leader before they head off to college, they've got an experience under their belt that will make it much more likely that they will continue in a missionary path in this culture. We have a similar dynamic going on in Camp Araminta. Not only teaches younger campers the basics of following Jesus, but also trains older campers as how to lead others for the kingdom. This year they had the camp facilities for themselves, and it made a huge difference. They were sharing it with another camp for years, but we've grown to the point now where where they can use the whole facility, and that has just made life much easier, made the time much more effective. And they had a remarkable turnout. If your students or your children or your grandchildren are not involved, they are missing out on a great way to grow in the faith and also in leadership. Remember Brian Eltomi was mentioning the fact that we don't just grow in a straight line, but we grow by steps. One of the major ways kids grow is to have a catalytic experience, be it Dynamos or Araminta. Get them away from home, get them immersed in a Christian fellowship, have them taught by dynamic leaders, and they come back at a higher level of maturity and growth than the day before they left. Now, we have much to do to strengthen youth ministry and children's ministry in this diocese, and that question is on the table right now. And I would love to continue that conversation. We're going to figure out how to do that. Now, speaking of raising up leadership, let me announce the ordination to the diaconate of Dr. Jessica Jones, December 6th at 6:30 at Grace Church, Fleming Island, who are now a part of us as of just a few minutes ago. Jessica is the editor-in-chief of our communique, so you've seen her name go by. Is she in the room? I don't know. She was here earlier. She is there. Would you stand? Let's give her a hand. I want to close with two final pictures for my collage. These both cover the areas of planting, strengthening, and raising up. The first is an initiative to enlarge the role of deaneries to take on these goals together: planting, strengthening, raising up. We want to get to a point where each congregation is involved not only in their own ministry, but in helping others disciple and grow the kingdom of God by God's grace. We will do more together than we will separately. We're not creating a big diocesan program. What we're learning is if we can figure out ways to coordinate ministry, encourage ministry, pray for ministry, plan ministry, strategize ministry together on a local level, or at least on a regional level, things will get better. And along those lines, we are rethinking the roles of deans. And we've called 3 new deans while retaining a current dean. But before I announce the new ones, I want to thank the outgoing deans for all their help and pastoral care to congregations throughout the diocese for the last several years. So I'm going to name them, and then we'll applaud for them together. If John Eason from the Northeast Deanery would please stand. Gil Crosby may not be here. Is Gil here? Jackie's been quite ill, so he may not be here. And Robert Sewell from the Western Deanery, if he would please stand. Let's give them a hand for their service. They have done much to strengthen our love for each other and strengthen our ministries together. And I can't tell you the encouragement that they've been to me along the way. A lot of their work is behind the scenes, dealing with the situations that aren't quite so easy. I next want to thank John Miller, Bishop Miller, who will be staying on in the Southern Deanery as dean. And I have said this before, but I can't oversay it, and John just doesn't understand it. But he is a deep encouragement to me, personally. Helps at the College of Bishops, but just we're on the same page in so many ways, with the same heart. And he's done a good job in his deanery. It's a hard deanery. It's spread out. It's a kind of very unusual deanery. But he's willing to stay on in that role, and some things are brewing, and we've just brought in the Anglican Church of the Word that now comes into his deanery, so things are moving along in the South. Before I announce the new deans, I'm going to ask John just to stand, and let's give him a hand as well. His experience as bishop and dealing with congregations is something I often and others often draw on. And finally, let me announce the new deans. It's convenient that you received Grace Church Fleming Island, because I've asked Mike McDonald, their rector, to be the dean of the Northeast. I've asked Eric Dudley from here at St. Peter's to be the dean of the Central Deanery. And I've asked Andrew Rowell from Christ Church Montgomery to be the dean of the Western Deanery. Would they please stand, and let's give them a hand. While Mike is new to the diocese, and it may seem like an unusual choice to appoint him a dean upon arrival, He's known to many of us here, and he is a strategic thinker, and I'm glad to have his gifts be joining us in this diocese. And finally, going back to that collage, I want to announce what I would only call a celebration. Many of you know the key role that St. Peter's here has played in the formation and the ministries of this diocese. Over and over again, it took on the role of what in Anglicanism is often called a pro-cathedral, which means a parish serving as a cathedral, taking on the types of events that a cathedral would have. So St. Peter's has hosted ordinations, synods, meetings, and conferences for the diocese on a regular basis, and has done so with a real love of the Lord Jesus and a deep commitment to serving in the diocese. As many of us have thought about the role of this congregation, and as we talked with diocesan leadership, we realized that for many reasons, we need to make St. Peter's not just the pro-cathedral, but the actual cathedral of the diocese. This will mean that we have a home base together, a center of our liturgical worship, and a resource for the whole diocese. We're not changing the legal or leadership structure of the congregation, as was often the case in the past for cathedrals. They will still essentially operate as a parish internally. Now, some have raised the question, what happens if we find that our ministry has grown so much that we spin off dioceses and St. Peter's is no longer the geographical center of the diocese? Well, a couple of things there. First of all, it's not currently the geographical center of the diocese. Just ask the people who came up from Anglican Church of the Word in the Pembroke Pines area and took 8 hours driving here. This does not feel central to them. But another response is that cathedrals are not often in the center of dioceses, historically. But also, cathedrals are often located in capital cities as a witness to the powers that be. And if ever the powers that be need a witness, it's now.